For Putin, Ukraine is an existential threat, not because Ukraine represents a military threat to Russia, but because what scares Putin the most is democracy. And he could never allow a country like Ukraine with a sizable Russian-speaking population to build a democracy and enjoy commercial ties and strategic ties to the West, to Europe and the United States.
That was former CIA station chief Jan Hoffman. I spoke with him last hour. President Trump appears to be running out of patience with Russian President Vladimir Putin. He posted on Truth Social yesterday saying this: "I've always had a very good relationship with Vladimir Putin of Russia, but something has happened to him. He has gone absolutely crazy. He is needlessly killing a lot of people. This is Zelensky's Putin and Biden's war, not Trump's. I am only helping to put out the fire, the big and ugly fires that have been started through gross incompetence and hatred." Here to weigh in is E.J. Kimball. He is a foreign policy analyst and the policy director at the U.S.-Israel Education Association. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thanks, Julie. Good to be here.
Okay, so those are strong words coming from President Trump to Putin, who he has maintained he's always had a very good working relationship with. What do you think of Trump slamming Putin, saying that he's, quote, not happy with the Russian president over his major strike against Ukraine, and also saying that he's surprised at what he's seeing and that new U.S. sanctions on Russia were a possibility? I mean, what is it going to take to finally get Russia to agree to a ceasefire? This war's been going on for 3 years now.
Well, first, I want to thank those that have given the ultimate sacrifice for our country, and especially to the parents, families of those who live with this every day to give us this opportunity to be here. Look, Vladimir Putin is going to push, and he is going to escalate until someone pushes and escalates back. He's looking right now at the West. He's looking at President Trump. And he thinks he's weak. He thinks he's not going to step up and challenge him. And he's wrong. I think we can expect President Trump to issue secondary sanctions on Russia in the coming days and weeks. But I think even bigger than that, Russia's economy is dependent on oil and gas revenue. And I think part of the president's recent trip to the Middle East is to bring down the price of oil. As we've seen in the past year, it's dropped about 40 cents a gallon, but the overall price needs to continue dropping to really hurt the Russian economy so that they can't continue to fund this war effort. The president is, Vladimir Putin is trying to get Ukraine to surrender. I think that's why we've been seeing such massive attacks in the past few days.
Right.
And he understands that he has an opportunity right now to try to change the battlefield for any future negotiations.
Here's the problem with that, though, because Ukrainian President Zelensky is not backing down, and nor is Putin. So then what's going to break this deal? Something's got to give. Zelensky actually wrote this in an X post on the U.S. silence, he's calling, on the war, saying that it is emboldening Putin. The world may go on a weekend break, but the war continues regardless of weekends and weekdays. This cannot be ignored. Silence of America, silence of others around the world only encourage Putin. Now, Zelensky has stuck his foot in his mouth a few times when it comes to President Trump, and obviously Trump does not handle it well. I mean, you saw the two awkwardly reacting to one another in the White House. Zelensky needs to keep his mouth closed when it comes to insulting President Trump, when he's got to have Trump in his pocket.
Well, look, without the support of the United States, we wouldn't even be having this conversation right now about the future of Ukraine and this war with Russia. Just wouldn't be happening. So, yes, he needs to keep his mouth shut and stop criticizing President Trump. President Trump is not a typical president. He's not a typical negotiator. It's why he has his book, The Art of the Deal. He makes his deals the way that he sees the best way to go about them. He's working to make a deal with Putin and Zelensky, and he's doing it in a non-traditional way. And Zelensky needs to give President Trump the latitude to make that happen. Criticizing him publicly is not going to make a deal any easier, because Putin's going to look at that and say, Trump is not going to actually put the pressure on me when Zelensky's criticizing him.
No, totally. I agree. Meantime, switching gears just a moment here, Trump is actually pushing to quickly stop the situation going on between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. Here are the president's comments on Israel and Hamas. Listen.
I think we could have some good news on the Iran front. Likewise with Hamas on the on Gaza. We want to see if we can stop that. And Israel, we've been talking to them, and we want to see if we can stop that whole situation as quickly as possible.
Okay, so like Ukraine, obviously Israel has the United States support, but it needs for Hamas to cooperate. You can't cooperate with terrorists. So where does this leave Israel?
Well, Israel needs to continue doing what they've been doing, which is decimate Hamas, its capabilities, and to continue taking over areas of Gaza to clear it, not just of Hamas and the terrorists, but the infrastructure there, the tunnel system, obviously also to find the hostages, both living and dead, including 4 deceased Americans that Hamas has been holding for nearly 600 days. President Trump is not calling for Israel to end the war with Hamas and let them survive. He wants this war to end and end quickly, and the world needs to step up and start calling on Hamas and those that are enabling them, including Iran, to bring an end to this war, for Hamas to release the hostages, and for Hamas to disarm and leave the Gaza Strip if there is to be any future for the people in Gaza.
All right, E.J. Kimball, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.